Welcome. I'm Rodney Williams, the pastor of Lebanon New Life Fellowship in Lebanon, Virginia. And we're so glad that you've joined us again this morning, and we trust that you and your family had a great Easter, even though it was different from that we Christians have been accustomed to. We are praying that it would not be long before we'll be able to meet again as a church family. But aren't you so glad that the Lord meets us where we are when we call upon His name? And we want you to know that we're praying for you and for your family, that God's hand of protection will continue to be upon you and meet your every need. But this morning, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had to reset your computer or your iPhone or your router before? Well, this happened to me a few days ago, that I had to reset my computer, and it got me thinking, why do we need to reset these instruments periodically? Now they tell me that when our devices are not working as they should, when they're too slow, when they freeze up, there is a need that they be reset. Because a reset, clears many of the errors and brings them more back to their normal condition or the original status. Now, I'm convinced that this coronavirus has positioned us for a reset. You see, there are some areas of our life that are not functioning properly and need to be brought back to their normal or more intended purpose. And there are four areas that I want us to consider resetting this morning. The first one is that we are smaller than we thought we were. Now, if there is one thing that this coronavirus has taught us, it is that we're much smaller than we thought we were. We see our smartest and our most powerful and influential people in the world are trying to figure this thing out. They're trying to get ahead. They're trying to get control of this microscopic enemy. And without a doubt, despite their power, despite the letters after their names or their financial resources at their disposal, this pandemic is much bigger than they are. And despite how intelligent and how capable, how big they may have thought they were, they are actually pretty small. And friends, that's okay, because there is someone who is much bigger than we thought that he was. And that someone is Jesus. Now, here is how Colossians chapter 1, beginning at verse 15, describes him. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For everything was created by him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. Now, to me, that sounds like he's pretty big. Amen. When we look at Isaiah's writings in chapter 40, we see God's people have been going through some difficult times for several generations, times of famine, economic hardships and foreign oppression. So God says to Isaiah, in chapter 40, beginning at verse 1, he says, "Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her." And one of the ways God had Isaiah to comfort them was by reminding them of just how big, how huge that he really was. Listen to this. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand, marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Surely the nations are like a drop in the bucket. They were regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Before him all nations are as nothing. They are regarded by him as worthless and less than nothing. Do you not know? Have you not heard? heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was formed? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and his people are there like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy, and he spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught. He reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground, than he blows on, and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens, who created all things. He who brings out the stormy host one by one, to cause forth each of them by name, because of his great power and mighty strength. No one, not any of them, are missing. Why do we complain, Jacob? Why do we say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the wearer and increases the power of the weak. And even youth grow tired and weary, and young men, they stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Now God is reminding us this morning that we're smaller than we think we are. But that is okay, because God is much bigger than we thought he was. Friends, he is in control. He is before all things. He is over all things. He holds all things together. He wants us to learn to lean up on him. He wants us to trust in him. He wants us to depend upon him. And he also says he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers his lambs in his arms, and he carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Now, Lebanon New Life, this morning, I want you to get this, that God is bigger than we thought, and God cares about us and what we're going through more than we thought that he did. Just listen to David as he prayed when he was feeling so small. He says, "Hear my heart, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." Oh, friends, that's what we need right now. That's what we need this morning, to be drawn to the Lord. Oh, to set upon his rock, upon his foundation today. And the number 2 reset, I feel, is evident for our lives today, is that we are more alike than we thought we were. You see, the world loves to have us and to try to force us with our differences, such as in race. They try to separate us by our skin color, by our education, even by our careers, where we live, if we live on the East Coast or the West Coast, or in Middle America today. Oh, we're separated many times by our age, by our social economic conditions, whether we're a Republican or a Democrat, whether we are liberal or whether we're conservative. But this virus has reminded us that despite of our thinking, that we are not all that different. We have seen sports stars, we've seen movie stars, we've seen rock stars, we've seen politicians, we've seen the royalty, we've seen the young and the old, the Democrat and the Republican, the male and the female, people in large cities, people in small cities, people from all across the country, all across the world, all have tested positive for this coronavirus. And not only that, we have the same concerns We have the same unanswered questions this morning. We have all washed our hands more than any time in our life. And that is why I believe that we are positioned for a reset. We are more alike than we thought we were. After all, we read at the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, beginning at verse 27, it says, so God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. Now, I think it's a good time for us not only to recognize this truth, but for us to take steps to bring our world together and stop the division of our land. Because Jesus said in Luke chapter 11 and 17, He said, any kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and a house divided against itself will fail. We see in Psalms 133 and verse 1, it says, how good and how pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. Let us hit the reset button and do our part. Reset number 3 is stop attaching our lives to things that won't last. Now, I'm sure most of us have played the game of Monopoly. It's my favorite board game. And now the goal of Monopoly is the same as any other game. It is to win. And in Monopoly, to win means that you owned all of the most expensive properties like Boardwalk and Park Place. You need to own one or two of the railroads like the B&O or the Pennsylvania. It means that you have owned several houses and a bunch of motels. And you need to avoid going to jail and the luxury tax. You need a lot of cash. But what happens when the game is over? See, every hotel, every house, every dollar, all goes back into the box. And friends, that's the way it is with life. Now, don't get me wrong this morning. It's not a bad thing to play the game well. But we must make sure that in the process of playing the game that we never forget one day the game will be over. Then it all goes back into the box. Our houses, our cars, our jewelry, our titles, our clothes, our bank accounts, our stocks and bonds, even our body, it all goes back into the box. Friends, this coronavirus has positioned us for a reset. And this morning, can I challenge you to stop attaching your life to things that won't last? See, we are reminded in 1 John chapter 2, beginning at verse 15, it says, do not love the world or the things that belong to the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him. For anything that belongs to the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's lifestyle is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world with its lust is passing away, but the one who does God's will remains forever. And then in James chapter 4 and verse 14 it says, what is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Are there any attachments in your life right now that are passing away? Let me ask you, if you could go back in time and find yourself back in Southampton, England on April the 10th in 1912, would you purchase and board the Titanic? Now, I hope your answer is no, because we all know the outcome, right? We all know that in less than 5 days, early in the morning on April the 15th, this mighty unsinkable ship would sink. Now get this. God is warning us of the same thing. We already know the outcome. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning at verse 16, it says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and our momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that is far outweighs them all. For we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." Friends, we know the outcome. And knowing the outcome is victory. It changes how that we view the setbacks along the way. Again, this coronavirus has positioned us for a reset. Stop attaching your life to the things that won't last, which leads us to this final reset. Start attaching your life to what really matters. See, one day, an expert in time management was speaking to a group of business students. And to drive his point home, he used an illustration that these students, I'm sure, never forgot. He pulled out a 2-gallon wide mouth pickle jar, and he set it on a table. And then he took a dozen fist-sized rocks and he carefully placed them one by one in the jar. And when the jar was filled to the top and no more rocks could be fit inside, he asked, "Is this jar full?" And everyone answered yes. And then he said, "Really?" And he reached under the table and he pulled out a bucket of gravels. And he began to dump some of the gravels in the jar, and he began to shake it and causing pieces of the gravel to work themselves down into between the spaces of the big rocks. And then he asked, once again, "Is this jar full?" "Probably not," some of the students answered. "Good," he replied. He reached under the table and he brought out a bucket of sand. And he started to dump the sand in the jar. And he went it went into all the spaces left in between the rocks and the gravels. And once more he asked the question, "Is the jar full?" "No," the class answered. Once again he said, "Good." And then he grabbed a pitcher of water and he began to pour it in until the jar was filled completely to the brim. And then he looked at the class and said, "What is the point of this illustration?" One student raised his hand and said, "No matter how full your schedule is, if you really work hard, you can always fit something else into it." "No," the speaker replied. "This illustration teaches us this. If we don't put the big rocks in first, we'll never get them in at all." I want you to get a hold of that this morning. Now, life gets crazy at times. And we get so busy with the water, with the sand and the gravel, that we have no time left for the big rocks. How many times have we said, "Someday, when things settle down, when I get my finances in order, someday when the kids are grown, someday when I get a better job or when I retire," and you can fill in the blank. "Someday I'll start doing all the stuff that I know that I should be doing and make time for those big rocks." But friends, the truth is, things are not going to settle down. Someday is never going to come. And if we keep waiting for things to settle down before we start doing what really matters in life, we will never get them done. See, we'll never do the things that God has made us to do. We'll never give back to the world the things that God created us to give back. We'll never become who God made us to become. We'll never love the people in our life the way He wants us to love them. And I've often said life is like riding a roller coaster. Life is so unpredictable. You never know what's coming next. Sometimes you go around a sharp turn and you think the wheels are coming off. Sometimes you go through dark tunnels where you can barely see the hand in front of you, and then the ride ends. It seems as though the ride of life just gets started and then it's over. Now I want you to get a hold of it today. Each of us are holding a 2-gallon pickle jar. And this jar is your life. And we only get one shot. And this coronavirus has perfectly positioned us to hit the reset button, to start connecting our life to what really matters. You see, it's in times like these that we begin to see the difference between what is urgent and what is important. What really matters when we get to the end of our road. What are those big rocks in your life? Do you know? I think I'll just let Jesus give you the answer this morning. We find it recorded there in Matthew chapter 22, beginning at verse 34. And it says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So what are the big rocks? The first big rock is our relationship with God. Maybe you've never surrendered your life to Christ. Maybe God has been displaced by water and by the gravel and the sand of your life. But friends, today is a good time to reset. Big rock number 2, your relationships with other peoples. Are you loving the people God has placed in your life the way that God loves you? Are you loving them the way that you want to be loved? Are the big rocks in your jar this morning? What are they? What comes into your mind? But if there are no big rocks in your jar this morning, it's a time to hit the reset button. Could it be that this coronavirus has perfectly positioned us to hit the reset button? See, Psalms chapter 61, verse 1 and 2 says, hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And friends, this morning I just want to take a moment and let's have prayer together. Dear Heavenly Father, as we come before you today, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the instructions of your word. Realizing that times in our lives, we get so busy. We get so busy doing things that is not that important when we really look at them. But help us today. Remind us today, what are the big rocks in our life? What are some of the areas of our lives that we've been neglecting? And God, I pray that you help us this morning, that we put priority in the areas of our lives that are needed, that we put a priority in our relationship with you, that we put a priority in our relationship with the people that are around us, with our family, with our loved ones. Lord, help us this morning, to hit the reset button in our life if there is a need to, as we call upon you and we ask you to minister into our hearts and lives, and we will praise you, give you all glory and honor, because we ask everything in the name of Jesus. Amen.